Hello, good morning, everybody. Happy Earth Day to everybody. Thank you for joining us for our Drinking Fountains and ADA, your guide to compliance. We are going to be covering a lot of information today. I've got Nicole Dennison with me here in a second, and I wanted to just quickly remind everybody I am, like most of you are right now, I'm working from home, and but I've got the loudest, craziest creatures in my house, my son and my big old Rottweiler outside. So if you hear barking or my son yelling at my dog to stop barking because he knows I'm doing a webinar, then I apologize. So our goal today, explaining the Americans with Disabilities Act and its requirements, how it affects design and installation of drinking fountains. Just keep in mind as I move through the presentation that all the requirements I'm about to cover a lot more than just drinking fountains. Being sure to keep top of mind the fact that you still have your state and local laws and to adhere to those as they sometimes surpass and go above and beyond what the federal guidelines are, which is what we're covering today, the federal standard. So to get started, my name is Justin Dunn. I am the sales product specialist and trainer for Haas. There's my information just below there. With me is Nicole Dennison, our marketing manager. Nicole, if you would like, would you say hi real quick?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending. We're really glad that you have made time for us today. As Justin said, we have a lot of great information. We'll be starting off the presentation with the educational content, and we really hope that you can stay for a little bit longer and listen to us as we walk through a really exciting new product launch that we have here at Haas. It's highly applicable in this market, and we are really excited to share the details with you.
I got a warning as I get a little carried away. I get a little too over passionate when it comes to compliance and safety and ADA and things like that. So I'm going to try to stay on topic and focused as we move forward, but saving a little bit of time at the end, maybe 5-10 minutes. Probably closer to 10 to cover that new product and talk to you guys about why it's so great. Moving forward, all attendees are on mute for the presentation. Once the presentation is complete, I'll be having a really quick FAQ, a couple of the most frequently asked questions. As the presentation progresses, use that questions section on your control panel to submit any questions that you have. After the webinar, I'll go in depth into those questions, get as much detail as I can on a document and send that out post webinar. So you have a complete form full of the questions and the answers that were asked during the webinar. We will also be launching poll questions throughout the webinar. Nicole and I greatly appreciate your participation in those. They really help us to continue to improve the webinar and give us new ways for us to interact and to service you, our customers and fans. So in that follow-up email, you're going to receive the on-demand recording, the presentation slides, some additional support materials, and then very important, you're going to receive the instructions on how to obtain your CEUs through ABIH, AIA, ASPE, and that follow-up email is going to go out between 24 to 48 hours after the presentation. So, and then one last message before we kind of get started, just thank you for joining us. Whether you're a champion for accessibility or your boss said, attend this webinar, or if you're bored at home or whatever the situation happens to be, thank you very much for being here and attending the webinar and helping to support us. So starting, just to give you a little history lesson, I always like to start this way. Our founder, Luther Haas, thank you, Luther, invented the modern drinking fountain in 1906. He formed the Haas Sanitary Drinking Fountain Company in 1909 in Berkeley, California. And given our company's history with hydration, innovation, we think that we are pretty uniquely situated to present this type of information to you. Luther was actually working as a sanitation inspector for Berkeley, California, when he had the thought to invent a device that would prevent users from putting their mouth on that device that was used to take a drink. Now public fountains were, before the first bubbler head, were typically a constantly running fountain, which isn't that uncommon today in the rest of the world, or a spigot that sometimes had a cup attached to it via chain that you would pick up, take a drink, and drop. You could even get a real fancy chain for your gross tin cup in the schoolyard, but it was still gross. The problem with this is that it spreaded germs, and lucky for us, Luther Haas put his mind to the task and created a simplistic solution to solve the problem and greatly improved public sanitation. On our agenda today, overview of the ADA legislation, common ADA installation issues, kind of intermixed with that first agenda there, and then ADA compliant drinking fountain and bottle filler installations, an ADA FAQ, and then the EWC 1200 series product launch overview, which I'm really excited to talk about. Which brings us to our first poll question. Right before we dig into this, Nicole, if you would please launch that poll question for us.
Okay. First question is, what is your role when it comes to drinking fountains? If this does not apply to you, please just disregard. Okay, we'll just give you a few more seconds to wrap this up. All right. Thank you. Thank you for your feedback.
Okay, now for a brief history lesson on the ADA for this webinar. Before I start throwing numbers and measurements at you, firstly and most importantly to remember is that the 2010 ADA standards are civil rights legislation. Prior to the standard and its inception, accessibility was almost non-existent. Nobody cared, nobody paid attention. There weren't any teeth in the requirements to provide access to buildings and grounds for an entire class of people that were being very heavily neglected. Thanks to people like Justin Dart, founder of Dart Industries, responsible for a few brands you would probably recognize like Duracell, Tupperware, etc., was one of the biggest advocates for the movement and is often referred to as the grandfather of the ADA. He was actually disabled himself alongside Mr. George H.W. Bush, not disabled, who was sitting president that signed the Americans with Disabilities Act into law on July 26, 1990. This new act granted reasonable accommodations to people with disabilities, and it prohibited discrimination based on their specific disabilities. It's actually a pretty cool story if you look into it, and it would be pretty hard to believe now that they were, met with really strong resistance at the time to the proposed changes. With all that said, let's get into it. The Americans with Disabilities Act, 28 CFR Part 36, Title 3, regarding public accommodations and commercial facilities, and its requirements are enforced by none other than the Department of Justice, which really helps to put those teeth into the standard. Title 3 is going to be our focus today. The following are the key sections of the standard pertaining to drinking fountains and their compliance. Also remember that Nicole is going to send out these slides to everyone after the presentation so that you can reference them later. No need to, feverishly take notes and start memorizing. You'll have all of this afterwards. And quickly, since I always get asked, Title II covers state and local government. Title I has more to do with anti-discrimination of disabled employees. So I'd like to start by talking about section 36.403. It's on the screen, which gives us a list of priorities when making alterations to provide accessibility in the facility. And you're going to notice that this list has drinking fountains pretty high as a priority on the list, even over accessible parking, the entrance, the route, restrooms, public telephones, fountains, as well as the parking, storage, and alarms are all high priority items because they're all basic human necessities when navigating the world. All walks of life, all people, everywhere, they need water. And that is right at the top of the list of things we need to survive, and we need to ensure that it's accessible to everybody. Chapter 1, Section 102 just lets us know that this document contains both adult and children's requirements based on the anthropometrics, which is a fancy word for human measurements, capabilities of the human body. Children are defined as age 12 or younger in the ADA. I've got examples later on in the presentation for both adult and children's height equipment. This section, Chapter 2, explain that where there is one fountain, typically a high side fountain, that there must be 2 fountains. Local building codes determine that what the number of drinking fountains that must be installed based on occupancy, how many people are going to be in the building. This simply states that there must be a high fountain and a low fountain. What most people don't understand is that the low side fountain is not the only one designed for people with disabilities. The high side fountain is also a disabled accessible fountain designed for those that are bending and stooping disabilities and may be using a walker, a cane, crutches, and may not be able to physically utilize the low side fountain. They're both designed for a certain class of people. Other than the aesthetics, drinking fountains are not designed for able-bodied people. It's reasonable to assume that if you are able-bodied, that you can take a drink of whichever fountain you choose. So if you're installing a single fountain in your facility or in your park, you must satisfy this ADA requirement and install a second fountain. They don't even need to be next to each other. They can be separated or on either end of a hallway, but they both must be present and accessible. 211.3 is referred to as the 50-50 rule. That's an easy way to remember it. And it simply states that that half of the units installed shall be high and the other half shall be low fountains. It just gives equal access, right? So for example, if we're installing 6 new fountains in a building, you could do 4 high fountains and you couldn't just put 2 low fountains in. You'd have to provide 3 high and 3 low since there's going to be 6 total fountains. So 50-50, right? The only exception to this rule is that where there is a fraction. And in another example, given the previous requirement, we'll assume that you have met the minimum number of drinking fountains for the property and have decided to add another one. This gives you 7 fountains. The 7th fountain can be either high or low. It's entirely your choice, so long as you have adhered to the 50-50 rule and 3 are high and 3 are low. That fraction can be whichever you prefer based on your area and who's using it. In Chapter 3, we start getting into dimensional and mechanical elements. You're going to hear me use the term elements a lot throughout the presentation. An element can be any of the devices that we're granting access to. This can be a drinking fountain, a phone, fire extinguisher, baby changing table, any of the above. Many of the measurements I'm about to go over actually apply to every single one of these elements, not just fountains, but fountains being our focus is what we're going to use as examples. This is one of the most important measurements to remember, and very frequently the section being violated in tear out and reinstalls. So 305.3, 305.5, they detail clear ground space to accommodate the wheelchair underneath the fountain. This allowing an approach that is unobstructed to the fountain. All right, we don't need to make an obstacle course. We don't need to make it more difficult to get to whatever the element is. You have to provide 30 by 48 inches of clearance underneath the element. which is just larger than your typical adult size wheelchair. Giving the user clear floor space for the wheelchair and for the hands to maneuver into that space, right? Because they have their hands on the side of the wheels, unless it's an electric chair, and manually maneuvering themselves around. We don't need to make it tight and difficult to get in and out of that area. Here is an example that really clearly demonstrates clear ground space in front of an element. This is one of my favorite slides. In this case, a telephone and a fire extinguisher. 305.5 explains that the positioning of this clear ground space, allowing for either a forward approach like the one you see on the left, or a parallel approach as you see on the one on the right there. And they're easily able to access those elements without any hindrance. So there has to be enough room there for the clear floor space. Keeping in mind the 30 by 48 inches going forward, it is very frequently the cause of many poor installations and compliance issues out in parks and public places. Remember also that there are minimum requirements. The more space you can provide, the better. It's just a minimum. Now, when the element is in an alcove, like in the examples above, wheelchair users are going to need additional space to maneuver. That's just a fact. And the clear floor space changes based on the depth of the alcove and what type of approach we're going to attempt. So in the first example, this is an alcove in place. Our 30 by 48 inches becomes 36 by 48 inches when the depth of the alcove exceeds 24 inches deep. Okay, so they change based on how deep the alcove is. And in the second, for a parallel approach, when the depth of the alcove exceeds 15 inches, our clear floor space must be 30 by 60 inches. Currently, only a few states I'm aware of require the use of alcoves, primarily California and Texas. Extending up from the clear space are our toe and knee clearances. So try to think of the clear floor space underneath the fountain as a three-dimensional space. Just like you see in the illustration, it extends up from the floor. Our toe clearance is 9 inches from the ground to the bottom of the element, and our knee clearance is 27 inches from the ground up. So obstructions in this yellow highlighted area are another very unfortunately common compliance issue. I've got some great examples that we've found later on in the presentation for your viewing pleasure. This space must be clear, and it needs to include any space between the victim's knees. I get this question all the time, and yes, this counts as an obstruction too. So think of like P-traps, hanging phone books, or anything else like that. So you can't have anything that's going to sit between their knees either. And that brings us to poll question number 2. Nicole, if you would start that, please.
All right. Which brands do you specify most or have in your facility? Again, if this is not applicable, please just disregard. All right, we'll give you just a couple more seconds to wrap it up. All right. Thank you.
Moving on, we are going to talk about section 307, which pertains to protruding objects and is primarily in place to protect another type of protected class that we haven't touched on yet. And that class is the vision impaired. Elements may only protrude into a walkway so much and must be located at certain heights, whether they are in an alcove or not. This is to prevent anyone in that walkway from running into those elements, right? And colliding with them. Objects with their leading edge, the lowest point on the front of the element, above 27 inches, may only protrude a maximum of 4 inches into the path of travel. But so long as the leading edge of the element is at or under 27 inches, then this is considered to be detectable by a detection cane device, according to the DOJ. So I have a good example here. This is one of my favorite illustrations other than the one I mentioned earlier. And I like to use this a lot as a demonstration. This one, and I stole this. This it's not my illustration. A lot of these images you can find on the accessibility website, or if you just throw in a quick Google, they're really handy. On the bottom right, we see an object very similar to a drinking fountain. And so long as its leading edge is at or below 27 inches, it can be detected through the use of the detection cane and early enough to be avoided and prevent potential injury. This fountain and any element, so long as it's meeting the 27-inch requirement, can protrude any amount into the space. It doesn't matter how far into the space it goes. The same rule applies for elements at or above 80 inches from the floor. This is considered headroom clearance and is similar to the previous example and can extend any amount into the space. If you're taller than, what is that, 6'8" inches, then you're gonna have a bad time and you're gonna be hitting your head on stuff. But technically speaking, those items can extend any amount into the space, so long as the leading edge is below 27 inches. On the left, we have an object sitting above 27 inches and below 80 inches. It's right in that area there, and it is not above headroom clearance and not below our 27 inches. So these projects can only protrude into the space by 4 inches. The only exception to this is a handrail, which are allowed to protrude 4.5 inches into walkways. I'm going to use our 1011. This is our high polished version HPS, and our SK3, the cane skirt, for this next example. This is a dual high-low unit, typically installed in high traffic, customer facing type areas, mostly due to its mirror finish, its design, etc. The SK3 cane skirt is what we need to talk about here. Where drinking fountains cannot be alcoved out of the path of travel, a cane skirt has to be used to lower that leading edge of the high side fountain to 27 inches and to make it detectable. It's not in an alcove, it's not protected from the walkway, and the low side of that high side, if that makes sense, has to meet 27 inches, so we have to lower it using a cane skirt. When using a detection cane, if unassisted, let's assume, you're generally following what's referred to as a shoreline or an outermost edge of a space. Since the visually impaired need to detect something on either side of the room that they may be traveling in either direction, and without the cane skirt in place, there will be likely incidents, I guess, where people will run into the high side fountain or have a difficult time finding it or detecting it, which is why we use the cane skirt. Many states still don't fully utilize alcoves, and until they do, cane skirts are going to be the answer. Unfortunately, a lot of places don't use cane skirts either, and that's generally, from what we found, just a lack of knowing that they have to provide one. But they are very important. So if you have fountains without those cane skirts, it's important to get them installed. Reach ranges, Section 308. Another important requirement when something like a bottle filler is installed, or when things like baby changing stations are installed, for example. The slide's pretty straightforward. If your reach is unobstructed, like in the photo on the left there, then you have a 48-inch max and 15-inch minimum reach range. Any buttons, handles, sensors, etc., all of the above must be located within this range. But as soon as we introduce an obstruction, our reach ranges start to change. It gets diminished. When an object is shorter than 20 inches in place, we keep our 48-inch high reach range, but our low reach range disappears, since we now have the fountain or another element that's in its place, like, for example, the baby changing table. When reaching over an object that is 20 to 25 inches, our high reach range is shortened to only 44 inches. Generally speaking, drinking fountains are shorter than 20 inches. So the middle example will be what our reach ranges are going to be. Usually, remember, we want to make sure things are as easy as possible and not really create a challenge for the disabled person. But since our body is reaching further over an object, our reach range is diminished, right? This DOJ advisory just defines the reach ranges for children based on age. Remember that children are defined as ages 12 and under in the ADA. These reach ranges apply to both forward and parallel approach, either way to an element. Starting on the left, ages 3 to 4 have a high-low reach range of 36 to 20 inches. 5 to 8 have 40 to 18, and ages 9 to 12 have a 44 to 16 inch reach. Obviously, as they grow, like weeds in some cases, their arm reach range grows as well, extending their reach range. Ages over 12 are expected to utilize adult height drinking fountains. In chapter 6, we get into specifics regarding plumbing elements and measurements. So first off, the first thing I need to mention is 602.2 covers clear floor space and the necessity to have that clear floor space centered on the unit. I cannot stress how important this is. It needs to be centered on the unit and not the alcove. I have some examples of installations that miss the mark on this kind of coming up, and I'll show you what that means. This is a forward approach, as a parallel approach must be set up like differently. Obviously, our toe and knee clearance must also be available. There is an exception included here for parallel approaches to children's units. Knee and toe clearance begins to diminish pretty quickly as we lower fountains for children's use. So the use of a parallel approach is really important, especially considering that children's wheelchairs are frequently adult wheelchairs. Custom child size wheelchairs, they can be pretty expensive and they can pretty quickly outgrow them. So a parallel approach helps to solve this issue. This is another really good illustration of the floor space and how they need to be centered on the elements that we're focusing on. As far as the fountain goes, since the clear floor space is intended for the wheelchair user, it is centered on the left low side fountain, right? And since there is no real floor space defined in black and white for the high side drinking fountain, the low side clear floor space can spill over under the high side fountain as much as is needed. Many make the mistake of centering the clear floor space on the alcove or in between the drinking fountains, which can lead to really expensive tear outs and redesigns. Here, this is our real quick example. You can see we have a total width of 48 inches in this alcove. It's not deeper than 24 inches, so we don't need to expand on our 30-inch floor space width. You will, however, notice that it shows a separate measurement for California. In typical fashion, California strayed from the standard requirements and mandated an additional 2 inches of floor space, bumping up the width of the floor space to 32 inches. So long as the state requirements go above and beyond the federal standards, they can supersede them. In this case, this is a great example and just gives more room for the user. So to center the fountain in the alcove correctly, which is not mandatory, by the way, but is typically done just for aesthetics, we would need to 28 inches total width of the alcove in California and 46 inches anywhere else. If the alcove was deeper than 24 inches, remember that we would need a total of 36 inches of clear ground clearance centered on the low side unit. Center line to center line, these fountains are separated by 16 inches, which means we would need an additional 18 inches of space on either side total to meet our 36-inch minimum and for the fountain to be separated. Since there's no obstructions under the high side fountain, our primary concern is that wall. Remember, if it's at all intruding into our floor space, that alcove would need to be redesigned or the fountain would need to be shoved over so that the high side fountain is closer to the alcove wall, giving us clear floor space centered on the low side unit. That's our priority. The fountain might be a little off center, but it would be compliant, right? So I have a couple more examples coming up. We're going to launch poll question number 3 real quick. Nicole?
All right, what is the most important benefit to you or your clients when selecting drinking fountains? I'll try to leave this open a little longer than I have the last two, so give everybody a time to participate. All right, we'll give you just a few more seconds to wrap it up here. All right, thanks for your feedback.
Okay, so this is an excerpt from the California Building Code. And what they've done, along with Texas, let me think, Georgia, Connecticut, I think that's it. If they've made it mandatory to locate all drinking fountains in alcoves or within wing walls, and that's to ensure that they don't impede into pedestrian walkways, right? So these protected areas must be 32 inches wide, 18 inches deep minimum. Wing walls kind of just act like an alcove, where an alcove can't be installed or is retrofitted into place. The wing walls must also project horizontally at least as far as the drinking fountain to avoid collision. While we're on the topic of Chapter 6, I should bring up that the flow of water must be within compliance from the equipment too. The height of the stream of water must be at least 4 inches high to allow for a bottle or glass to be put underneath and filled for those who may be incapable of leaning over. It also makes it a lot easier for someone to take a drink. We make this really easy at Haas. Ours is actually front adjustable, so you can really quickly adjust that stream if you have the right tool. So I've got a couple examples here. This first one is a really bad one. I'm not sure who found this, but I love using it. This one's a bit obvious, right? Alcoves are typically the issues when we see non-compliance, or what is referred to as a drive-by lawsuit. In this installation, we have the low side installed on the right side, and a large gas line is obstructing our tow and knee clearance. So this could be fixed just by swapping the two fountains so that the clear floor space on the left is being used with the low side fountain, so long as there is our 30 inches or 32 inches for California between the gas line and the wall on the left, and whatever that other valve is, then we would be compliant. But switching these fountains around would be our solution here. Otherwise, tear out, reinstall, or hide that gas line. Here's another one. This example shows a high-low configuration with 4-inch tile being used behind the fountains. We can see that the center line of the fountain on the low side to the wall, and we only have 14 inches, giving us only 29 inches of total clearance, which isn't a big hindrance on that space, but even a small amount off of that can make it more difficult for somebody to access this fountain, and we don't need to do that, right? So they may not have considered the thickness of the tile maybe when they finished the alcove here. But be aware, people, school districts, governments are wary and highly diligent when ensuring the details are correct, because they know that litigation and the cost behind fixing these is a real deal, a real threat. Okay, over to children's use for just a moment. Section 602.2 gives us the maximum bubbler height of 30 inches and a 3.5-inch maximum depth for the bubbler, which isn't uncommon for drinking fountains anyways, from the front edge of the fountain. This also allows us to forego our previously mentioned knee and toe clearance so that we can lower the fountain where the uses are intended to be children. There will need to be a parallel approach and space for that available though. Many states have their own requirements for children's height and approach and their own preference, so be sure to reference those local requirements before pulling a Justin said so. Very important. Many states don't allow for a parallel approach. is what I'm getting to. So for children's fountains specifically, and the ones that require a front approach, some even specify their own knee clearance heights and things like that. So check with that first, make sure it doesn't supersede the federal standards and go above and beyond, and adhere to those as well. Let's move on to a couple other quick examples. This one has a lot wrong with it. Their intention was good and was to install a high-low fountain with a third child height fountain in a nice cascading aesthetic look, but it's all mixed up and backwards and terrible. So we got some good looking fountains in place though. They were just unfortunately installed incorrectly and missing. So first, our clear floor space and our knee clearance is being obstructed, right, by what they intended to be the child fountain on the left, and which should have been the ADA fountain, since it's a longer arm. And not only is the fountain way too short for our knees and our toes to fit under, but a wheelchair is going to have trouble maneuvering to the fountain bubbler while it's hitting the left side fountain. So if they're going for that middle fountain, which is what they intended for ADA, then there's no way the wheelchair is going to fit in there correctly. They're going to have a really hard time getting that close to the wall and things like that. The high-low combo unit on the left should have been installed on the right, with this single fountain on the right having to be installed on the left side, with enough room between it and the center fountain to meet our 30 inches. So I'll show you how it's done. So this right here, I'm going to use our 1501 and our 1311 for this example. These are enameled cast iron fountains you would typically find in schools, medical facilities, things like that. Here's basically the mirror image of the example I just showed earlier, but compliant. The 1311 high-low unit is installed on the left as the standing and the ADA fountain with the 22 inches between the center line and the center fountain. And the child height fountain gives us plenty of room for our clear floor space, and is plenty separated from the child height fountain to give access. So here you can see the outline of the 30 inches of space we needed. The high side doesn't offer any obstruction, so we just need to ensure that the child fountain is far enough away that it doesn't interfere with the wheelchair. That's it. Our clear floor space is that three-dimensional space. It's a 30 by 48 by 27 inch space under the wheelchair accessible fountain. Remember, it's a 3D space. And then center line to center line, we would be 23 inches if we need to bump up our floor space to 32 inches for California over the child bowl. So, but that's how you would do it. That would be a compliant installation right there. For a few outdoor examples, this is our 3300 FR. It is a freeze protected unit, and someone installed it way too close to that wall. You can see here that our floor space is obstructed, right? We can't really easily fit a wheelchair there. Even if they came in at an angle, we would have a pretty serious situation here. It would be hard to access. We would probably suggest a reinstallation if somebody didn't get to it first, and involve litigation and things like that. Here's another example of our for outdoor compliance. This fountain, for example, has an adjustable arm that can be adjusted for either adult ADA or child height, which is really important to be adaptive to situations, especially in public parks and things like that. These are incredibly common in public parks, especially because of their ability to accommodate both. But when installing these fountains, considering the approach and the direction of the bubbler heads on the fountain are incredibly important factors to help ensure compliance. So each of the following examples are going to be compliant. There's nothing wrong with these, but I wanted to make sure you had examples of compliant installations as much as possible. Above we have the 3150 installed. If the 3150 or any other outdoor fountain is installed against a wall, building or railing structure, whatever it is, the center line of the wheelchair accessible fountain needs to be a minimum of 15 inches from that wall, right, to give us our 30 inches of clear floor space. And we'll of course need the 48 inches out from the base. allowing ease of access. Hopefully nobody is surprised by this, but it doesn't take much to make it difficult to utilize drinking fountains from a wheelchair. So same as indoor installations, we need to have our available knee and toe clearance under the fountain. Lastly, I touch on this sometimes. I like to bring it up as much as possible. On the right side there is a visual representation of the clear floor space for the high side fountain of 30 by 30 inches. This is not required, but it is generally agreed upon amount of space necessary for accessibility. And since it's intended for those with stooping or bending disabilities, then we need to assume that walkers or other devices may be used. And this is just the average size of those devices. So just generally agreed upon, not required, but I like to bring it up. Common practice in public parks is to pour a pad of concrete specifically for the fountain to help improve the fountain from, or remove the fountain from pedestrian walkways and give users a nice firm surface to stand on, or for wheelchair users, a firm surface to roll the wheelchair on. In this example, you can clearly see the path of travel on the left side, which gives easy access to the low side fountain. If the orientation of the fountain were any different in this exact layout, access to the fountain would be kind of difficult. To fit the fountain perfectly here, to include both wheelchair free ground space and the high side, we need a pad that's 69 by 52 inches to completely accommodate it. Different example this time with wing walls or guardrails in place, but just giving you an example of what a different situation looks like. You have the path of travel on the left there, clear floor space for both the front approach to the ADA low side accessible fountain, and then you have some space for the high side as well. Here, Hosway make a bunch of different models that comply with ADA requirements. The one on the second from the right being my absolute favorite because it includes the dog bowl. And if you haven't heard them barking in the background, I'm lucky so far because they're in the back trying to interrupt the webinar as we speak. For those who may not be aware, the 2010 ADA standards for accessible design was derived from the ANSI A117.1 2009 standard. The updates that these standards last received included the additional information for bottle filling stations, which was incredibly important. Remember this, in addition, a bottle filler does not replace a drinking fountain. I get that question all the time, and not everyone has a cup or bottle. So drinking fountains are going to be incredibly important for those that don't have the capability to capture water. 602.4 indicates that the bottle fillers must adhere to 602.4.1 and .2 regarding clear floor space, which is again 30 by 48 inches. With that in mind, if a bottle filler is not provided for both fountains, which is generally the case, then one bottle filler must be located on the low side to allow access to the wheelchair-bound people. Since if the bottle filler is on the low side, we can ensure that everyone can reach it, right? That's easy to get to for those that are standing. And if located on the high side, we're gonna make it pretty difficult for people in wheelchairs to access that equipment. 2 bottle fillers is perfectly fine though. So don't keep the expectation that we have to only include it on one side. If you want 2 bottle fillers, that is perfectly fine. We can do that for you. I'm gonna use the 1920, our retrofittable bottle filler for the next couple examples real quick. This is the 1117 LN with the 1920 bottle filler over the low side, which is accessible and well within our reach ranges. All we need to ensure here is that the button on the front is reachable and that the activator is either hand operated or automatic. Very important. Remember, it's easy for us and we need to make it easy for others too. In accordance with 308.2.2, our reach ranges, the activation for the bottle filler is located at 46 inches below the required 48 inches we covered earlier. Remember, this is a maximum height, and since it's a maximum height, the activator can be located anywhere between the fountain and the bottle filler, not just below the fountain. Here's another common installation model, the 1501. This one's, again, just popular in schools, mostly because of the enameled surface. It's just cool to the touch in sunlight instead of it's hot stainless steel burning kids, which is absolutely awful. So we utilize enamel on the equipment to help cool it down. Here, we just have the single 1311 fountain that could easily be used as our third child height fountain or as a standalone ADA fountain. And guess what? Or a high side fountain, all depending on your facility and what needs it's trying to fulfill. Speaking of child height, remember children are defined as under the age of 12. Here we're utilizing the age range of 9 to 12. Our reach range maximum would be 44 inches. The bubbler head has to be a maximum of 30 inches or below for a child height fountain at the spout. Not the top of the bubbler head, at the spout, the outlet of the water. As you can see on the screen, our bottle filler activation is at 42 5/8 from the floor, well below our 44-inch max, and the bubbler is at a 30 inches, well within compliance. So this would not do in an adult ADA installation unless raised, obviously, since the fountain would be obstructed to our knee and toe clearance and the bottle filler would be unreachable. It would just need to be raised and could fall right into adult height ADA installation. Okay, we're gonna move on to the FAQ section. Real quick, I have a couple really commonly asked questions that we're gonna get to. This one's just a really nice installation here at our Reno International Airport. Hopefully, all the information so far has been useful to everybody, and you maybe feel a little bit more knowledgeable. Remember that equal access is, to this day, not always taken seriously or into consideration. So take the information you've gotten today so far and be advocates for the awareness of accessibility. It is really important. So we've got our last poll question. Oh no, one of the two last poll questions, and the FAQ, and of course our EWC section at the end here. So poll question number 4, Nicole, if you would please.
All right. What percentage of the time do you specify a bottle filler when specifying a drinking fountain? I've had a lot of some questions regarding bottle fillers, so very much appreciated, and just keep an eye out for the follow-up materials, which will have all of your questions and thorough responses provided. So hot topic right now, I think.
Highly thorough responses, I assure you.
Highly thorough responses. All right, we'll give you just a couple more seconds here and close this down. And then we'll get started in the FAQ and the EWC product launch. So we hope you can stay on the call for just a few more minutes longer. All right, Justin, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. So moving on, our FAQ. These are the two most common questions I get, and I always think they're really important to answer right off the bat and not wait for the question section. Number 1, does everything have to be ADA accessible? Nope. But you do have to ask yourself the question, does my building or business have places designed for public accommodation? This can mean a lot of different areas: retail, restaurants, parks, airports, schools, apartments, etc. If the answer is yes, then you need to ensure that you have accessible routes and the elements of the building are also accessible. Remember too that private businesses are also responsible so long as they have 15 or more people employed, but that changes based on state slightly. There are, of course, areas in certain types of facilities where wheelchair access should be deterred. You don't need to make the cooling tower on your local power plant or your wastewater treatment facility ADA accessible. just remember to think that where have I given access to my facility and make the appropriate changes. Number two, are children's height fixtures required by the ADA? Yes, and not just for fountains. Think about the customer. Daycares, schools, and the like have mostly children that need to have accessible toilets. They have almost exclusively children, right? They have much fewer adults on site. So these requirements are not always the easiest to follow in the ADA, but they are required, and future iterations of the standard will hopefully, oh God, hopefully. It's taken me forever to understand this thing, and I love summarizing it for people and helping people to understand it because it took me forever. But hopefully they start providing easier to digest information on this than the current standard. But yes, they are required generally where assistance from an adult is not available. We assume in public areas you'll have your parents to rely on. So it's nice to see child height fountains in these areas, but it isn't always required, which is why we don't see child-sized toilets in a lot of public spaces, because you have typically an adult to assist you. Oops. Did we skip? Oh, we're here. I've got our information slide here at the end, which will have our contact info and stuff like that I'll go over real quick. But here we go. Introducing the Haas 1200 series electric water cooler, which I am very excited to finally introduce and to start talking about. We have overwhelmingly positive feedback and reviews so far. I'm going to cover the available models as well as some of the key features. We expect this to be and designed it to be highly competitive with other brands in the market, and certainly much more aesthetically pleasing than your old school wedge design electric water cooler that you're just stashing by the bathrooms. This is designed to blend in with modern architecture and devices in your facilities, and look accommodating to the facility instead of a sore thumb. So these are the models, our current models. There are 8 total, including the 4 on the screen, the difference being an F for a filtered unit at the end of the model name. So starting on the bottom right, we have the model 1201S or a 1201SF if you wanted a filtered unit. This is just a single fountain, electrically cooled water. On the left there, you have the 1202S, which is the high-low unit. A unique feature and really cool about these fountains is the installation time. I'm going to go over that here in a second. But the fact that the right side unit here is actually the parent unit. The one on the left is just a dummy unit. There's actually nothing much in there. It's being fed by the right side unit, which is incredible for installation time, even the designing of the area and stuff like that, because you only have power, water, and a drain for one unit, saving a bunch of time. The top right has one of my absolute favorite features about this. The bottle filler, I think, has an incredible design to it. You'll see a cavity that you have to access on a lot of modern bottle fillers where you have to reach your arm into a little cutout area where the bottle filler is. This is a completely open design, really easily accessible. If you're accessing this from a wheelchair, for instance, if we're still talking about ADA, sometimes you're not at a direct angle for the fountain. And oftentimes if you're wearing a prosthetic, arm, hand, etc., accessing a cavity, a small cutout for the bottle filler can be really difficult. And this is a nice, beautiful open design, which is really cool. And then on the left there, you have the deluxe, the 1212S or 1212SF with the filter, which is the high-low with the bottle filler. And I think it just looks amazing. Some of the key features I wanted to talk about: number 1, touchless bottle filler sensor. Eliminates the spread of germs and promote the use of reusable bottle options, more important than ever, and which I think most would agree is most important the world over. It is also an interactive display, not only including a bottle counter, which is very popular now, and filter status, but a full menu allowing you to change things like the sensor, the sensitivity, backlight. You can check the filter status or even set a custom energy saving schedule for the work week and for the weekends. Access to the menu is hidden and protected by a tamper-proof screw, so only maintenance teams can get to it. But once pressed, the backlit display becomes a fully interactive menu, which is really cool. We have an available industry-leading 3,000-gallon NSF filter, above and beyond what our competition is providing. It's a carbon block filter protecting the water you drink from lead, cysts, taste, odor issues, whatever you can think of. It's a great filter. We have 100% water content flushed, an auto purge feature basically to prevent Legionella buildup and ensure fresh water with every single use. It also has a tankless evaporator that really sets it apart from the competition, preventing any nasty buildup in the tank inside of the unit. It does not have those issues, which I think is really a key feature to talk about. The auto purge takes place every 24 hours of non-use. So if it's in a low traffic area, if you're not familiar with Legionella, congratulations. You definitely don't want to be. It's a nasty bacteria that is unfortunately a hot topic right now. And with the auto purge feature, you're just not going to have those types of concerns. It will consistently purge the unit if non-use takes place for that 24 hours. So you have consistent and constant fresh water. It is designed to effortlessly retrofit over our competitors' models. You have an absolute ton of room. And if there are plumbers on the webinar, a lot of you are going to understand what I'm talking about immediately. But there is a ton of room under there. Which saves time and saves money on the installation. We cut a lot of time out of the installation time for this type of product, or the time of your maintenance staff who probably have better things to do. Incredibly quiet operation, minimizes distraction for surrounding areas. Sometimes they're located near meeting rooms, public spaces, front lobbies, things like that. And the quiet operation really helps to keep the environment from getting too loud. Proprietary electronics for enhanced LED communications at the unit, and not just for the bottle filler. We do have an LED display underneath the drinking fountain. So if you don't have the bottle filler, you still have a series of LED lights that are updating you as far as the status goes for the energy savings, the filtration, and things like that. Not visible to the user, but a maintenance team member could easily check the status of the unit. And speaking for the enhanced LEDs, and back to the backlight feature, the display on the bottle filler, you have constant energy efficiency mode alert there, the filtration status, the bottle counter, everything on there. Just easy to see, easy to use, no scary red lights when the filter is about to expire. It's also built with it's standard, the smart energy savings capabilities, which greatly extend the life of the product. What happens is if it's in a low light situation or non-use for an extended period of time, it shuts down the chilling components, extending the life of the chiller and its capabilities. So far and beyond what our competition is offering. Some of our available resources for the product include product launch videos, spec sheets, master spec, really great brochure that our marketing team put together, competitive comparisons. We have everything that you could possibly need whether you're interested in one for your school or you want to spec this into a high rise. Either way, we have everything that you could possibly need. Remember too that we have an entire catalog of hydration products that we can fill any need with. So don't be afraid to contact us. We've been doing this for 114 years since Luther. So for more product details, visit www.hosco.com/EWC or contact your local plumbing representative. We'll have a ton of follow-up information for you in the follow-up email, which will be coming very soon. This is our closing poll question. I have one last slide after this and saying bye, but if you would participate, we'd really greatly appreciate it.
All right, I've gotten a lot of great feedback in the chat, so I'm trying to answer these questions as quickly and thoroughly as possible. But basically, the last question, and based on the feedback I've received, the question is, would you be interested in learning more about the EWC 1200 series in your area? We will be providing a lot of these pieces, digital links to you after the after the webinar. But if you would like to talk to somebody to get some more detailed information, please just provide your contact information and we will go ahead and get you in contact with someone who can answer those questions a little more thoroughly for you. And I'll give this just a few more seconds and then we'll wrap it up as well. All right. Thanks for your feedback, guys. It's been a highly interactive webinar. And again, I'm trying to get to these Q&As as much as possible. Otherwise, again, be on the lookout for the follow-up materials and we will provide all of the questions that were submitted with their answers in that document. So thanks again.
And we will be sure to get you your CEU credits and that email with all the follow-up information. Thank you very much again for helping to support this webinar and for seeking out this information. Hopefully you take this and go forth and spread this knowledge. Reach out to us if you need anything at all. Our contact information is right there on the screen. We also have a live chat feature on hosco.com. Our customer service team have an incredibly fast response rate. We'll get right back to you and let us know if you need anything. Stay safe, thank you, and again, happy Earth Day.
Thanks again, everyone.